Something is very wrong with the story Claressa Shields is telling the world right now, and the interview that exposed it is not the problem, it is the mirror. What just happened on that podcast, where a co-host looked her dead in the face and asked her how much longer she was going to be in a relationship with somebody else's husband, was not a gotcha moment. It was not an ambush. It was not disrespect. It was the first time in this entire 2-year saga that somebody in a professional setting refused to let her rewrite the timeline in real time. And the reason she has not been able to shut up about it since is because that one question cracked open a door she has spent every waking hour trying to keep nailed shut. Every subliminal post, every "I ain't letting nobody else off the hook," every "let me catch these girls outside," every filtered AI-looking photo she has thrown up on her story in the last week is not confidence. It is damage control from a woman who just realized the public is not buying the fairy tale anymore, and the questions are only going to get harder from here. There is a specific moment in that interview, and I promise you we are getting there. We are breaking it down frame by frame. Body language, eye movement, defensive posture, the whole thing, where you can literally watch the mask slip in real time. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But that is not even the biggest piece of this. The biggest piece is the paperwork. The biggest piece is the timeline. The biggest piece is the divorce that was filed in May of 2025 in New Jersey for a $325 filing fee and has not moved an inch since. And what that stalled paperwork tells you about who is really running the show in this relationship and why Claressa is the one taking every bullet while the man she is defending has not put out a single public statement calling her his wife. 2-time Olympic gold medalist. Undisputed champion in multiple weight classes. The self-proclaimed GWOAT. And she cannot handle one podcast question without threatening civilians on Instagram 48 hours later. That is not a woman who is winning. That is a woman who is drowning and hoping nobody notices the water is up to her neck. And by the time we are done here today, you are going to understand exactly why the harder she swings, the deeper she sinks, and why the one question she is trying to bully everyone out of asking is the exact question that is about to define the rest of her career. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Now let me set the table properly for the people who are just catching up, because you cannot understand why this one interview broke Claressa Shields the way it did without understanding the full weight of what has been building for over a year now. Claressa Shields is not just any athlete. This is a woman with 2 Olympic gold medals. This is a woman who has held undisputed titles in multiple weight classes. This is a woman who has publicly stated she is chasing a $20 million Nike deal and positioning herself as, in her own words, the Beyoncé of boxing. She has spent a decade building a brand around discipline, dominance, and being untouchable inside the ring. Papoose, real name Shamil Mackey, is a 50-year-old New York rapper who has been publicly married to Remy Smith, better known as Remy Ma, for over a decade. That marriage was not a private situation. That marriage was a full public brand. Love and hip-hop New York built entire storylines around it. Papoose himself became famous online for constantly posting about his wife, celebrating anniversaries, defending her in every direction, and branding the entire relationship as, quote, black love. That was the persona. That was the shtick. That was the entire public identity this man built for over 10 years. And then somewhere between the summer of 2024 and the winter of 2024, that whole thing came apart in the ugliest, most publicly humiliating way possible. And Claressa Shields ended up at the center of it whether she wants to admit that or not. The timeline as she has told it is that she met Papoose for the very first time at the Shakur Stevenson fight in July of 2024. Her story is that they became friends, then became close, then eventually became a couple, and that by the time anything happened between them, Papoose and Remy were already effectively separated. That is her story. That is the version she has repeated on The Breakfast Club, on the Pivot podcast, on Young Jack's podcast, and everywhere else she has been given a microphone. And here is the problem with that story. The receipts do not match it. Her own fiancé at the time, Tony Rich, was publicly posting about her, calling her baby, showing up at her fights, putting her robe on her, and telling the world he loved her deep into August of 2024. Weeks after the Shakur fight where she claims she first met Papoose and started falling for him. Papoose himself was at her July 27th fight, taking pictures with her, standing near her, while Tony Rich was posting from that same event calling her his baby. That is the entire crux of what has been eating at the public conversation for over a year, and every time Claressa gets asked to reconcile that timeline, she does the same thing. She pivots, she deflects, she gets defensive. and she accuses everybody else of lying. The stakes here are not just personal, and this is what I want everybody watching to really absorb before we go any further. Personally, Claressa is putting her $20 million Nike bag at risk every time she gets on social media threatening civilians and calling women out of their name. Culturally, she is testing whether the hip-hop and boxing world will keep protecting a woman who publicly stepped on another woman's neck when that other woman is a beloved figure like Remy Ma. And systemically, this entire situation is exposing how carefully these public relationships are stage-managed, how the friendly interviewers protect the narrative, and how one podcast host asking one honest question can unravel a story that a whole team of PR handlers spend a year constructing. So the question I want you sitting with as we get into the evidence is this: if the story was true, why does one question break her every single time? Let's start with what everybody can see with their own eyes, because before we get into the deeper stuff, we have to walk through the surface evidence piece by piece, and this is where the story starts falling apart in ways she cannot explain her way out of. The first piece of evidence is the interview itself with young Jack, and specifically the moment the co-host looks at her and asks, and I am paraphrasing here for the recap, "How much longer are you willing to be in a relationship with somebody's husband?" Because at the end of the day, that is what people are looking at. And Claressa's immediate response was not composure. It was not confidence. It was not the reasoned answer of a champion who has done this 1,000 times. Her immediate response was to say pause out loud, like she was hitting the pause button on a VHS tape, like she was frozen in a video game. Pause. As if you can pause a live conversation. That single word gave away everything, because that is the verbal tick of a person whose brain just short-circuited under pressure and needed a second to reboot. Two-time Olympian. Global broadcast interviews on her resume. And her instinct under mild pressure was to yell pause like Adam Sandler in Click. That is piece one, and it is on tape, and anybody who wants to see it can go pull the clip up right now. The second piece of surface evidence is her body language throughout that entire interview segment. And listen, I am not a licensed psychologist. I want to be clear about that. This is my analysis as a person who has watched thousands of hours of interviews, but the eye movement in that clip is textbook defensive behavior. She cannot maintain eye contact with the woman asking the question. Her eyes are shifting left, right, up, down, everywhere except at the person she is speaking to. Compare that to any of her Fight Week interviews where she is trash-talking an opponent, dead eye contact, straight at the camera, unshakable. But the second the question turns to Papoose, her eyes start moving like a cartoon clock. That is not the body language of somebody telling a story they are comfortable with. That is the body language of somebody trying to remember which version of the story they told last. The third piece of evidence is the receipts on Tony Rich's own social media, and this is where the timeline she has built completely collapses in on itself. On August 21st, 2024, Tony Rich publicly posted, "I love you, Claressa Shields," while she was holding her championship belts. This is weeks after she says she had already met Papoose and started falling for him at the Shakur Stevenson fight on July 6, 2024. Then on her own podcast interviews she has said, and I quote from her own words, that she and Papoose were talking on the phone every day from basically the moment they met, that she personally invited him to her July 27th fight, and that they had been together for 6 months by the time the news broke. She has also said on the Pivot podcast that she and Papoose officially started dating in August of 2024. So which is it, Claressa? Because if you were talking to Papoose every day starting in early July, and you were officially dating him in August, then why was your fiancé posting "I love you" to your championship photos on August 21st with heart eyes and calling you his baby at your fight? The math does not math. The timeline does not timeline. And no matter how many times she gets the softball version of this question from Charlemagne or Melissa Ford or Big Tigger, the receipts on Tony Rich's page are still sitting right there, publicly, for anybody who wants to look. The fourth piece of surface evidence is the divorce filing itself, and this is the one that really cements how flimsy the whole story is. Papoose filed for divorce on May 22, 2025 at 5:16 p.m. in the New Jersey court system. The transaction ID is public record. The filing fee was $325. That was over a year ago from where we are sitting right now. And in over a year, there has been zero public update, zero final judgment, zero divorce decree, and no timeline for when this thing is supposed to actually be finalized. Claressa keeps deflecting with, he filed, okay, filing is not finalizing. My cousin can file for a business license. That does not mean the business is open. And the fifth piece, just to seal this section, is her own social media contradictions. She is out here calling this man her hubby on Instagram, hubby, the word that literally comes from husband, while simultaneously demanding in interviews that people stop calling him her husband because he is nobody's husband. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot call him hubby on Monday and then get outraged on Tuesday when the world uses the actual root word of the pet name you chose. That is not composure. That is not intelligence. That is a woman getting caught in her own contradictions in real time and refusing to see it. And oh, believe me, we are just getting started. And oh, do I have more for you? Because if you thought the interview clip and the timeline were bad, wait until you see what the culture around her has been doing while she has been busy threatening civilians on Instagram. The Papoose defenders, the Remy defenders, the hip-hop press, the boxing press, the podcast circuit, everybody is starting to move on this in a way that Claressa's team was clearly not prepared for. And the stands of this couple are not going to like what is coming next, because we are about to walk through the specific reactions from people inside the culture that show exactly how isolated Claressa Shields has become in the last 6 months. I want everybody to pay close attention here, because this next section is where the story goes from her problem to her career's problem. Stay locked in. The first piece of cultural evidence is Remy Ma's own public statements over the last year, and specifically the video she released from what she called outside of her own house, where she made it crystal clear that she was not asking Papoose for anything in the divorce. She said, on camera, that she packed his clothes up, that he had not come to pick them up, and that as far as she was concerned there was really nothing to split because she did not want anything from him. That statement matters more than people realize, because it means the divorce that Claressa keeps hiding behind, the one that has supposedly been dragging on for over a year, has no real financial complication attached to it from Remy's side. There is a child involved, custody has to be figured out, that part is real, that part one will not minimize. But when one party publicly says on record they want nothing, and the other party has already filed the paperwork, and a full year passes with no finalization, you have to start asking who is actually stalling this and why. The second piece of cultural evidence is Remy's own reference, in her own words, to what she has been shielding Papoose from for years. She said publicly that if the world knew all the details of what really went on, it would crush people, it would make people cry. She said she covered for him out of love and out of the length of the relationship. She said her image could take hits that his image could not. That is not a woman speaking from a place of jealousy or scorn. That is a woman who spent years being the buffer between this man and the public reputation he built, and who is now, in her own controlled way, letting the culture know that the Black Love brand was not what people thought it was. And the culture is hearing her loud and clear. The third piece of cultural evidence is the way the hip-hop internet has turned on Papoose in the last several months in a way that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. This is a man who is untouchable in the culture. This is a man whose brand was so bulletproof that critics were scared to even joke about him. And now? Now he is getting clowned on comment sections, on reaction videos, on podcasts, on Twitter, on TikTok. The rumors about him allegedly hitting somebody at a private event and Remy allegedly taking the charge to protect his image. I have to say allegedly because this is what has been reported in the streets and not fully confirmed in a court filing. Those rumors are being repeated in every corner of the internet, and his brand cannot recover from that kind of narrative shift no matter how many freestyles he drops. The fourth piece of cultural evidence is the reaction to the Young Jack interview clip itself once it hit the shade room. Go read the comments under that post. The overwhelming, dominant response from women in the hip-hop community, the same women who have supported Claressa's boxing career for years, was not sympathy. It was not defense. It was disbelief that she thought that answer was going to fly. Women who have been on her side through every fight, through every call-out, through every controversy, were finally looking at her like, sis, this is not it. And when you lose the women in hip-hop culture, you do not get them back with an Instagram threat. You do not get them back with a let me catch you outside. You get them back with accountability, and accountability is the one thing this woman has refused to offer. The fifth piece I want to walk through is what the friendly interviewers have been doing, and this is where the pattern gets really interesting. The Breakfast Club sat her down and pretty much gave her a spa treatment. Melissa Ford, same thing. Big Tigger, same thing. Every single one of these interviews was structured to protect the narrative. No hard questions about the Tony Rich timeline. No hard questions about the July 27th fight overlap. No hard questions about Papoose calling her his person while never once publicly calling her his wife or fiancé. They gave her a red carpet. And then young Jack's co-host walked in and asked one real question, and the whole house of cards started swaying in the wind. Now, I want to be fair here for 1 second, because credibility requires acknowledging counterarguments. Somebody watching this right now is going to say, but she has never been officially confirmed as a homewrecker. The marriage might have already been effectively over. Adults are allowed to move on with their lives. Fine. I hear that. But here is the problem with that counter. The timeline receipts do not support effectively over. The timeline receipts show a woman who is still publicly engaged to another man in late August 2024, while allegedly already talking to Papoose every day since early July 2024. That is not moving on from a dead marriage. That is running 2 tracks at the same time. And the culture can smell that. The 6th piece I want to drop before we shift gears is the AI filtered photo situation, and this one might sound petty, but stay with me because it matters. Claressa's recent posts of her and Papoose have been so heavily filtered, so heavily AI touched, that people in the comments are questioning whether these are even real current photos of the two of them. She looks like a GTA character. He looks like a completely different person. And when a couple has to lean that hard on filters to sell the image of togetherness, the culture reads that as insecurity, not confidence. And on top of all of that, there is the win record chain situation where you rarely see both of them wearing their big chains in the same picture. It is almost always her wearing it or him wearing it, seldom both at the same time. Are they sharing jewelry? For two people who claim to be worth $8 million and hold a full-time job in hip-hop media, that is a strange optic. All of it, the filters, the chain rotation, the deleted posts, the subliminal messages at 3 in the morning, paints a picture of a relationship that is being performed for the internet, not lived offline. Now here is where we have to gear shift, because everything we have talked about so far is the visible layer. The interview, the receipts, the culture reaction, that is the surface. What is really going on underneath this whole thing is a business story, and once you see the business story, every single decision Claressa Shields has made in the last 12 months starts to make a completely different kind of sense. Because let me tell you what this really is. This is not a love story. This is not even really a scandal story. This is a leverage story. And once you understand the leverage dynamics at play here, you will never look at Claressa Shields the same way again. The first systemic angle I want everybody to sit with is the endorsement economy angle. Claressa Shields has publicly stated she is chasing a $20 million Nike deal. She has said on record that she is trying to position herself as the Beyoncé of boxing. That is not a small ambition. That is a top-tier corporate branding play that requires her image to be absolutely spotless. Nike does not throw $20 million at an athlete whose public identity is entangled with a still legally married man whose wife is a beloved cultural figure. That is not how these deals work. Endorsement contracts have morality clauses, they have image clauses, they have consumer sentiment triggers. And every time Claressa gets on Instagram threatening women or calling herself Papoose's hubby's woman, she is quietly incinerating her own bag. Nike has an entire compliance team whose job is to monitor exactly this kind of thing. So the systemic question is, why does she keep doing it if it costs her that much? And the answer, in my opinion, is that she does not fully understand the ecosystem she is trying to break into. She is bringing boxing bravado into a corporate branding conversation, and those two worlds do not translate. In the ring, you can trash talk anybody, and it makes you a star. In the boardroom, one bad clip on the shade room can cost you 8 figures. She is playing checkers in a chess room, and every threatening subliminal post is another move in the wrong game. The second systemic angle is the podcast and media ecosystem angle, and this is where it gets really interesting. Hip-hop media in 2026 is not the same industry it was 5 years ago. The Breakfast Club still matters, but the real cultural conversation is happening on independent podcasts, on live stream shows, on smaller platforms that are not scared of losing access. That is why young Jack's co-host was able to ask the question in the first place, because that platform does not need Claressa Shields the way the Breakfast Club needs continuous booking access to A-tier celebrities. The friendlier interviews she has been getting from the major outlets are, in my opinion, part of a manufactured protection structure. These outlets have long-term relationships with her team. They know they will need her back for future fights, and they cannot afford to burn the relationship. So they give her the softball treatment. But the independent podcast circuit does not care about that access. They care about the clip going viral. And once you understand that shift in the media ecosystem, you understand that Claressa can no longer control her own narrative just by picking the right rooms. The rooms are picking themselves now. Every time she says yes to a podcast, She is rolling the dice on whether the co-host in the third chair is going to be the one who breaks the story open. And that is a very different reality than the one her PR team is probably still selling her. The third systemic angle is the leverage dynamic inside the actual relationship, and this is the piece that I think most people are not talking about but need to hear. When a man in his 50s who has built his entire public brand around one specific woman for over a decade suddenly steps outside of that image and into a relationship with a much younger, much more famous, much more brand valuable woman, the leverage inside that new relationship is not what people think it is. On the surface, Claressa is the higher value partner. She is younger. She is more famous internationally. She has bigger corporate potential. She is at the peak of her earning years. But underneath that, Papoose has something she does not have. He has already been through the machine. He has already built and lost and rebuilt a public brand. He knows every media move, every PR move, every deflection technique, every narrative trick. He is 50 years old in hip-hop media. That is a lot of experience being brought to bear on a woman who has spent her career learning how to hit people, not how to run PR damage control. And in my opinion, and this is opinion, this is analysis, this is not confirmed fact. The reason Claressa keeps taking every public bullet for this relationship while Papoose stays relatively quiet is because he has coached her into thinking that is what a ride or die does. That is what love looks like. That is what black love looks like. But black love, real black love, does not require one partner to detonate their brand while the other partner watches from the sidelines and posts freestyles. The public silence from Papoose during all of this is deafening. Where's the man who used to post about his wife every 15 minutes? Where is the man who built his entire personality around defending the woman in his life? Why is he not out here every single day making it explicitly, publicly, cameras rolling clear that Claressa Shields is his wife, his person, his everything? Because he cannot. Because he is not legally clear to do that yet. Because his divorce is still sitting in New Jersey court 15 months later with no update. And the systemic reality here is that Claressa is fronting the entire emotional and reputational cost of this relationship, while the man she is defending has structural reasons for staying quiet. That is not love. That is leverage. And when you combine all three of these systemic angles, the endorsement economy angle, the media ecosystem angle, and the internal leverage angle, you start to see that Claressa Shields is not fighting a story. She is fighting a machine. And she is losing. And this is where I have to say the thing that nobody else has been willing to say out loud yet, because everybody has been dancing around this for a year, and it is time somebody just laid it on the table. The truth is that this entire situation, from the July 2024 timeline to the May 2025 divorce filing to the August 2026 podcast meltdown, has never been a love story. It has been, in my analysis, a carefully staged image rebuild for a 50-year-old rapper whose brand was decaying, executed on the back of a woman who is famous enough to reset the conversation, but young enough not to see the setup. That is my read. That is my honest, fully considered read after watching this whole thing play out in real time. And here is what the evidence, when you stack it all together, actually suggests. Papoose's public brand as, quote, black love was already showing cracks well before Claressa Shields ever entered the picture. The love and hip-hop storylines were getting stale, the public interest in his and Remy's marriage was declining, and his own solo brand was not carrying enough weight to keep him relevant on his own. Then, allegedly, an opportunity presented itself. A superstar athlete at the peak of her career, freshly coming out of a long, complicated engagement to Tony Rich, hungry for the corporate branding leap of her lifetime, in need of a partner who understood the media game. And, according to what has been reported and what the timeline suggests, a series of conversations began happening that were kept private for reasons that had nothing to do with Tony Rich and everything to do with the fact that a certain party was still very much married. That is the reality of what the receipts imply, and Claressa has never once given a coherent explanation for why the July 27th fight had both Papoose and Tony Rich in attendance if she was really just meeting Papoose as a friend. She has never once explained why Tony Rich was still publicly declaring love for her on August 21st if she had already emotionally moved on. She has never once acknowledged that Papoose and Remy's marital problems were not public knowledge at the time she started spending private time with him, meaning the world had no way of knowing there was a separation happening, meaning her decision to be private was, by definition, functionally the decision of a woman who knew the optics were going to be catastrophic. Now stack that against the biggest piece of evidence of all, which is the divorce filing itself. 15 months. 15 months since May 22, 2025. 15 months since a $325 filing fee was processed in New Jersey. 15 months of no final judgment. 15 months of Claressa Shields taking every public shot while the man she is defending has not, as of my last check, been able to walk into any major venue and introduce her as his wife, because legally she cannot be. And under New Jersey law, I already showed you the Google search result on this earlier in the story of what has been reported. A divorce can absolutely be finalized even if one spouse refuses to sign. There is a default judgment process. There is a contested divorce process. The system has built-in mechanisms specifically so that one uncooperative party cannot indefinitely hold up a divorce. Which means the 15-month delay is not a Remy problem, and it is not a legal system problem. Somebody is not pushing gas. And when somebody with allegedly $1.5 million and access to top-tier legal counsel cannot get a divorce finalized in over a year in a state that has explicit mechanisms to prevent that kind of stall, I have to conclude, in my analysis, that there is a reason the finalization has not happened yet. And in my opinion, that reason has more to do with the value of remaining married but separated than it does with any actual obstacle to the process. Because as long as the divorce is not final, the emotional narrative can stay flexible. As long as the divorce is not final, the Black Love brand does not have to be officially buried. As long as the divorce is not final, Papoose gets to keep the sympathy of the audience that loved him and Remy for a decade, while also enjoying the exposure boost that comes from being publicly linked to a superstar athlete. That is the reveal. That is the truth bomb. Claressa Shields is not being loved. She is being used as a bridge between one public identity and the next, and the man doing it has 15 months of unfinalized paperwork sitting in a New Jersey courthouse to prove it. That is why she keeps snapping under one question. That is why the eyes shift. That is why she is threatening civilians on Instagram at 8 hours ago and yesterday and every day this week. Because deep down, on some level she may not even be fully conscious of yet, she knows. The math does not math. The paperwork does not paperwork. And no amount of hubby captions is going to change what the receipts already said. But here is the good news in all of this, and I want to end this on the right note, because the beautiful thing about the truth is that eventually it does its own work without anybody having to lift a finger. Remy Ma is winning without saying a single disrespectful word. Think about that for a second. Think about the discipline of that. This is a woman who was publicly humiliated by having her marital problems turned into a global talking point, who watched another woman get tattooed with her husband's name, who has had to sit through 15 months of subliminal posts and podcast clips and Instagram stories, and who has responded with almost total composure. She did one measured video from outside her own house. She has made a couple of controlled, dignified references to what she covered for over the years. She has, by every account, focused on her daughter, her career, and her peace. That is the woman who does every job to 100%. That is the woman who understood that the loudest response is often no response at all. That is the woman who is still, right now, sitting on the moral high ground of this entire situation without ever having thrown a single punch on social media. And here is the contrast one-liner that I want everybody to hear clearly. One woman is on Instagram threatening civilians she has never met, and the other woman is quietly building a life the culture is going to end up rewarding her for. That is the whole story in one sentence. Meanwhile, look at where Claressa is. She has the belts, she has the accolades, she has the athletic pedigree that should be untouchable, and instead of standing on that legacy, she is spending her waking hours defending a relationship that the internet cannot stop poking holes in. She is threatening interviewers. She is threatening women in comment sections. She is posting filtered photos at 3 in the morning. She is putting the $20 million Nike deal she said she wants further and further out of reach with every post. And on the other side of all of this, Remy Ma has not lost a single fan. Remy Ma has not lost a single endorsement. Remy Ma has not damaged her brand in any measurable way. The culture watched, and the culture decided, and the culture is siding with the woman who kept her dignity. And that is how this always works in the long run. That is how the culture always corrects itself eventually. The loud one loses. The disciplined one wins. The one throwing tantrums on social media loses the endorsement. The one who stayed quiet keeps the respect. This is not a new lesson. This is not something I am inventing for this video. This is a lesson the culture teaches itself over and over again, and every time somebody thinks they are going to be the exception, the culture reminds them that they are not. Claressa Shields could have been the exception. She could have used the podcast to acknowledge the situation was complicated, to acknowledge her fiancé's situation deserved a cleaner exit, to acknowledge that the optics of the divorce timeline are difficult, and to ask for grace while things got sorted out. That would have been the composure play. That would have been the champion move. Instead, she chose pause. She chose let me catch you outside. She chose I ain't letting nobody else off the hook. And every one of those choices tightens the noose. The right person is still winning in the story. The right person is still in the right position. The evidence, when you lay it all out from July 2024 to August 2026, speaks for itself. And it is going to keep speaking, whether Claressa Shields wants to listen or not. And this is only the start, because there are two very specific things that are about to happen next that I want everybody to keep their eyes on. The first is the divorce paperwork itself. We are now in August of 2026, and that New Jersey filing has been sitting there for 15 months with no public update. The next scheduled court movement, whether it is a status conference, a default judgment motion, or an actual finalization, is going to tell us everything we need to know about who has been dragging their feet and why. If we hit month 18 with no movement, this story is going to explode all over again in a completely new direction, and the questions are going to get 10 times harder than what young Jack's co-host asked. The second is the endorsement conversation. Nike has been publicly connected to the $20 million rumor for a while now, and their compliance decision on whether to move forward with Claressa Shields as a signature athlete is going to send a message to every corporate partner in sports about how tolerant they are of the kind of public behavior she has been exhibiting. If Nike walks, the whole athletic endorsement world watches. If Nike stays, other companies get bolder. Either way, that decision is coming, and I am tracking it. So make sure you are locked in with me, because the next chapter of this story is not something you can find on the friendly interview circuit. This is the channel where the real questions get asked and the real receipts get shown, and I am not slowing down. Hit subscribe if you have not, hit the bell so you get every drop the moment it happens, and drop the word timeline in the comment section if you want me to go all the way back to July 2024 and walk through every single overlap, every single receipt, every single post, every single fight week photo, and lay out the master timeline of exactly when Claressa met Papoose, when Tony Rich got frozen out, and when the paperwork actually started moving behind the scenes. If enough of you dropped the word timeline, that is the next video, and it is going to be the definitive breakdown that ends this debate once and for all. Because here is what nobody is telling you about the Tony Rich exit. There is a specific date range in late 2024 where his entire online presence around Claressa shifts in a way that lines up perfectly with a piece of evidence that has not been publicly connected yet, and once that connection gets drawn, the whole 2-year story rewrites itself in real time. That is the next video. That is where we are going. Do not miss it.